All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us tonight for the Big Texas Author Talk. My name is Florinda Flores Brown, and I'm the Director of Programs at Gemini Ink, where our mission is to teach the craft of writing to people of all skill levels so they can bring their stories to life. And we are so excited to be featuring the incredible dancer, and amazing storyteller and writer, Carmen Tafolla, with her latest book, Warrior Girl, as well as moderator Rita Urquijo-Ruiz. For those of you who have not been with us before, the Big Texas Author Talk is a monthly online series that features authors in Texas, from Texas, or anyone writing about Texas. This event is a collaboration between Writing Workshops Dallas, Gemini Ink, and David Samuel Levinson. And I will say that our usual hosts, Blake Kimsey, the executive director of Writing Workshops Dallas, and David weren't able to join us tonight. But before we get started, I do want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Lone Star Literary Life, Humanities Texas, Interabang Books in Dallas, and the Twig Bookshop in San Antonio. And again, if our participants can just be muted until after our reader and moderator are done speaking. So just an overview of how it's going to go tonight. I'm going to introduce our author and our moderator. They are going to read and talk, and the last 15 minutes, you all will get a chance to ask your questions. You can post them in the chats. One thing to know is we do encourage a very lively chat. So as Carmen is reading, as they're having their discussion, if you want to drop any responses or anything in the chat, please feel free to do so. And again, the last 15 minutes of the session will be a chance to pose any questions that you have for Carmen or for Rita. Without further ado, we will get started, and I will introduce Carmen Tafolla, who is an internationally acclaimed Chicana writer from San Antonio, Texas, and a professor emerita of bicultural bilingual studies at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Tafolla served as the Poet Laureate of San Antonio from 2012 to 2014 and was named the Poet Laureate of Texas for 2015 to 2016. Tafolla has written more than 40 books and won multiple literary awards. She is one of the most highly anthologized Chicana authors in the United States, with her work appearing in more than 300 anthologies. And again, we're excited to have her with her new book. And then her moderator for this evening is Dr. Rita E. Urquijo-Ruiz, who is a Mexicana, Chicana, queer educator, author, and translator who teaches Spanish, as well as queer, Chicana, Chicano, and Latinx Studies at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. She is the translator of Xelana González and Adriana Garcia's award-winning books, Where Wonders Grow, Donde las maravillas crecen, and Remembering, Recuerdo. She was absolutely thrilled when Dr. Carmen Tafolla invited her to translate her novel in verse, Warrior Girl. Rita's story about being previously undocumented, entitled First Visit, was published in the award-winning anthology Somewhere We Are Human, Authentic Voices on Migration, Survival, and New Beginnings, co-edited by Reyna Grande and Sonia Guinyansaka. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Carmen, who will get us started, and we will go on from there. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I am absolutely delighted to be able to share Warrior Girl with you. And we decided it might be fun for me to read a few excerpts from the book before Rita gets us a little deeper into things with some very relevant questions. So I'm going to start at the beginning, read you a little bit of the beginning, just a snippet of the middle, and one point from the end, without any spoilers, without getting into the really exciting stuff that happens when things all go into crisis. Life slapped her hard hand. Felt like life had slapped her hard hand over my mouth and tried to shut me up. Tried to keep me from being me. Keep me from even my song, even my name. Yeah, she tried to shut me up. And for a little while, she did. How I got my name. So when I was born, my mom said, ay, qué preciosa. I want to name her Selena. But my dad said, I want to name her after your mama, Teresa. And mom nodded kind of and said, we'll name her Selena Teresa. And we can call her Tere around the house so grandma can know how much we love her. And they did. And everything was good with my name except for one thing. My dad's last name is Guerrero, and my mom's is Amaya. And the nurse got confused when she saw all those names. Selena, Teresa, Guerrero, Amaya. I don't think 4 is too many names, but I guess the nurse did. So she wrote down Guerrera with an A at the end instead of an O and dropped the Amaya completely. No one noticed right away because they were too busy oohing and eyeing over me. Then the birth certificate came in the mail and they noticed it, and Dad just laughed. He said, well, Guerrera means a woman warrior. I bet she'll be brave and strong and fight for justicia. And then he said, we could get it fixed later, maybe. And Mom repeated, maybe. Then the very next month, they deported my dad back to Mexico for not having the right papers. Funny how papers can be so right and so wrong, and can even mean more than people in some folks' eyes. What matters? Luckily, my dad returned to us pretty soon because there was no way he was going to leave my mom alone to raise their beautiful baby girl, me. Mama said to get back, Dad had to work to raise money and borrow some from his cousin too. He had to swim across a river at night and then cross a desert with no water and then walk through a field of snakes. But he came back and he kept working here to pay for the rent and for the food and the diapers. He kept trying to get his papers, but something always had to be paid first, like taking me to get my shots or getting the motor fixed on the car or learning enough English to do his taxes or working to help Mama pay for her nurse's aid schooling. But nothing was going to stop him from being there for me and being the best dad. And that's what really matters. Couldn't wait. I couldn't wait for the first day of first grade. I was big. I was cool. I was ready to go and show that teacher that I was smart and pretty and wonderful. I even put 2 bows in my hair so that I look bien pretty. I thought first grade was going to be better than Christmas, but instead of getting things, we'd be learning things. And I especially wanted to show the teacher that I already knew how to write my name in big letters, like a big girl. Tere. Tere, the name of my grandma, and my grandma's grandma, and my grandma's grandma's grandma. I remember that day so clearly, remember bursting with excitement. But sometimes things don't turn out the way you hope. First grade Tere tells her story. My teacher was so pretty, a big tall lady with blonde hair, but our first conversation went like this. Hi, I'm Miss Jones. Hi, I Tere. Ah, Terry. No, it's Tere. No, it's pronounced Terry. No, it's pronounced Tere. No, watch my mouth. Terry. Terry. See? No, it's Tere. It's always been Tere. Look, make your mouth like this and pronounce it right. Terry. That's what your name is here, and you'll learn to say it right. Pero right is Tere, miss. She looking at me so mean, and her eyebrows, they like 2 standing up lines of mad. So I say, okay, because no importa. It doesn't matter. I in first grade, I smart, and I want teacher lady to like me. Erased. When I color the Cinderella princess, I make her look like my big cousin with long black hair down to there and blue glitter above her eyes. But teacher says Cinderella has blonde hair. She takes away my picture. She says, do it over, do it right. And I think, no importa, because maybe she doesn't understand. Then we go to the cafeteria and the food looks weird. I'm hungry after lunch, but no importa, doesn't matter. In gym, I get my own coach, like in the Olympics. He lets the boys go first to show us how to run the races, even though I run faster than Juanito and Chale. And when I yell, Córrele, Juanito, coach comes over to scold me, says, this is the U.S., speak English. So I say, run, Johnny, run. Coach still looks at me funny, but I think, no importa, because gym is over. We go back to the class, and teacher says she's going to teach us how to write our names. I show her my paper full of big, proud letters that say, Tere. She erases my name, says I got too many capitals and not enough R's, tells me, do it over, do it right. But my paper looks so empty, and I feel like I just disappeared, got erased, turned invisible, and it hurts. So I'm glad we have a game at the end of today so I can show La teacher how smart I am. Teacher explains the game. When I touch your head, jump up and say your name. I jump up and say, Tere. And she mumbles something about putting me in the slow class. I don't want to be in the slow class. Move slow and run slow and act slow. But I don't say anything. I go home and take off my 2 bows. I have first grade again tomorrow, but no importa. It doesn't matter. Moving. We had to move. I don't remember why. My dad got a new job, or the old job finished, or didn't pay enough to stay. The new town wasn't any bigger than the old one, but the people were meaner to us, and I felt a lot more lost, especially in school. The teacher there must have taken lessons from the teacher in the old place, because she too changed my name to Terry. Guess none of them liked names that sounded like Spanish. So they took away my name. I wonder what is left that they can't take away. We didn't live with Grandma back then, but she'd always come to visit and tell us stories to remind us who we were. The house would fill with laughter, and nothing ever could keep us from celebrating everything. One of the things my grandma Tere taught me was how to make a fiesta out of every day. Every day she would whisper, today is a celebration. It's the feast of San Fulano de Tal. And she would tell me the name of the saint for that day, or the celebration for that day, or the reason we should be happy that day. El Día del Mariachi, so we'd listen to mariachi music. El Día del Chef, so we'd cook something special and exotic. El Día de la Risa, so we'd spend the day joking and laughing. Now I know why Tere is just as strong a warrior name as Guerrera, because when you're celebrating, when you find a reason to be happy, a reason to sing or dance or paint or play or laugh or write, they haven't taken everything away from you. I come from a long line of people who know how to keep their courage up and their love strong and their kindness always growing, who know how to keep their birthday party smiles no matter if folks are giving them trash day dirty looks. I come from a long line of rock solid moms, dawn braving dads, and grandmas who light candles of hope that'll burn for a lifetime, grandmas who teach you how to build a shield. I built my shield to keep ugly things out. I built my shield to let lots of love in. I built my shield to protect me from name callers, tongue sticker outers, dirty looks, dirty tricks. I built my shield to welcome in big dreams, warm smiles, new friends, new hope. I built my shield from love from the blessings an old woman gave me when I was still too tiny to talk, from glances honeyed with que chula, que maravillosa, que wonderful. And now my shield is unbreakable, able to protect me or a friend or even a whole pueblo. So they moved back right after she finished the 6th grade. They decided to move back to San Antonio to move in with grandma. They're very happy. She's getting ready to start 7th grade. She's very excited and is going to have electives and is feeling very empowered, has decided that she's been kind of silent. She's going to reclaim her name. But the night before 7th grade starts, her father's deported back to Mexico again, like he had so long ago when she was a baby. And this time it's in a time period when the news carries stories of cages at the border with people locked in cages, and they don't hear back from him for a very long while. She does make new friends, and the friends become part of her strength, and her grandma becomes part of her strength. And the friends are amazing. Liz, who's quiet and supportive and gentle. Cata, who's so proud of being bilingual and so outspoken. And when people ask, she's raised by her grandma's sister. And when people ask her, you don't have a dad? She answers, you don't have a grandma's sister? And Chato. And this is a little poem about Chato. No, miss, yo no sé nada, Chato blurts out, honest-hearted, when Miss Jackson says, you know what X represents, y'all. And the whole math class busts out laughing. He hides his worn tennis shoes under the desk and his eyes turned low where we can't see what they're thinking. I hear his exasperated sighs as he plods through the math problems, and when he gives the teacher his paper, his smile pleads with her to be kind. She doesn't look up from the desk, doesn't see it. Only I see the hope that still grows from the hands he is squeezing together, head down and shoulders slumped. The year goes on, the bulk of the of 7th grade, they're now into the new year, and too many holidays spent without dad. And then most of her teachers are so supportive, and she gets turned on to writing. Her English teacher is a great comfort to her. But there is one teacher, the same one that never saw Chato, that gets her involved in a very difficult situation. This is called erased and ignored. So there's this teacher who always pronounces my last name Guerrera, even though I tell her it's Guerrera. And she never pays attention to Chato when he raises his hand to ask for help in math. So today I was standing in front of the lockers, getting my notebook for afternoon classes, and some loud girl at a nearby locker was cussing out her friend and threatening, I'll hit you so hard they'll take you to the hospital if you're still alive. Math teacher hears the commotion and comes running out toward me. She's shouting, young lady, you stop that behavior immediately. Before I can say anything, she's on this walkie-talkie to the principal's office, telling him we've got a fight in the Northwest hallway by room 207. And when me and Liz and Chato try to tell her it wasn't me, she ignores us. Loud girl keeps laughing and points a finger at me, saying, yeah, ma'am, I bet Mexican girl was going to pull a knife on me. And math teacher keeps looking at me like I'm the criminal. But it was her shouting, I try to explain. And again, this teacher doesn't hear me at all. Clean cut. So math teacher is still holding on to me when another teacher starts running towards us and all out of breath gasps, that girl over there was the one shouting, not the one you're holding. And math teacher lets go of me with a blank look on her face and just says, oh, and to the walkie-talkie, never mind. Then she walks up to loud girl and just says quietly, don't do that again, okay? Now get to class. A minute later, loud girl is hurrying to her class, and math teacher is explaining to out of breath teacher, she must have been provoked. I know her, clean cut, comes from a good family. Liz and Chato and I just watch in shock. Then the bell rings. We run and I don't see either of them till after 5th period, but all through PE, I feel like I'm going to cry. By the time we're together again in 6th period math, I'm breathing slow and deep like an angry bull. Liz fumes. I can't believe she would just automatically assume we were the troublemakers. Chato looks down and mumbles, I can. And Ms. Math teacher, she just conducts class like normal and doesn't meet my eyes not even once. It's like I'm invisible, or even worse, when it comes to anything except trouble, I don't exist at all. Don't let it in. What did Miss Jackson mean by clean cut? I asked. White, Chato states flatly. Well, maybe she was just confused, says Heather, who's joined us at our lockers at the end of the day. She's always been nice to me. Nice to you, says Chato. Have you ever wondered why she calls on you every time you raise your hand? You mean she doesn't call on you? Heather asks. Not once this whole year, Chato sees. I can wave my hand for 30 minutes and she won't even look my way. Well, she certainly wasn't nice to Sally today, snaps Liz. She was wrong, and she should have apologized. Heather looks thoughtful. Maybe it's because those girls go to her same church and she knows them. I see them there together all the time. Nah, Chato says. I think it's about color. Some colors she trusts, and others she doesn't. Heather's mouth is open. But that's just like those men who thought the jogger guy, Arbery, was a criminal just because of his color. And Liz and Chato and I just look at her and nod. I'm still shaking when I get home. I think about Grandma's shield. To stay strong, remember who you are. What they say can't hurt you if you don't let it in. But every now and then, I guess even the best shield gets a little crack in it. And then all kinds of stuff happens towards the end of the book. The pandemic hits, things become more and more desperate. But I want to share one point from the very end called They Don't Have the Power, where she has learned that sometimes you have to look inside you to find strength, not just outside. Sometimes they try to take everything away from you. Sometimes they actually do. But then you look inside and find something there they can't even see and they can't even understand. And so they don't have the power to see it, touch it, or take it away. They don't have the power, but you do. You are all that has happened to you and all that you dream to be and all the possibilities, whether reached or not. And all of your story and all of your name and all you have loved and all you choose to celebrate. All of you as warriors for the good. Guerrera, Guerrero, this knowledge, this courage, this all inside you will be your shield, will be your power.
Mil gracias, Carmen. Brava. Buenas tardes, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us to hear the great Carmen Tafolla and her newest 40th, Carmen, the 40th book. Congratulations. How incredible. What a record you've had. I do want to say that I'm Rita Urquijo-Ruiz, professor at Trinity University and translator and author as well. And when Carmen Tafolla invited me to do the translation of this incredible novel in verse, I said, yes, absolutely. As busy as anyone can be, when La Maestra calls you, you put things aside and you said yes. So Carmen, I am honored. I am really, truly honored that your invitation came through for me to collaborate with you on this powerful and empowering novel. I do want to say a little bit of a background in terms of how do I come to Carmen Tafolla. And it was in graduate school at the University of California, San Diego, where another one of my sheroes, Gina Valdez, another poet, introduced us to your sonnets and salsa the book that was published back in 2001, and I fell in love with your poetry and fell in love with what you do and how you write. And not until I get to San Antonio do I get to meet you, and to be in your presence is always a blessing and a gift. And so thank you for not just your writing, but everything that you do. And so let's begin with a summary of sorts for this novel. How would you describe it? If we said, Carmen, you have a little paragraph to describe the novel, what would you say about it?
This is a book about being silenced. And most people, whether they realize it or not, have been silenced at some point in their lives. But some people have had almost every form of expressing their voice taken away from them. And when young 12-year-old Selena Teresa Guerrera Amaya realizes that she's had her name changed, her language forbidden, her history erased right out of the textbooks, she decides to reclaim what is rightfully hers and to fight for it, thanks to Grandma's advice, using positive weapons like celebrations that strengthen and clarify who we are, that educate, and that help us figure out a way to make our world more like the world we'd like it to be.
Wonderful. As your 40th book, this is your first novel, but then it turns out to be your novel in verse. And so you have covered so many genres, among them short stories, creative nonfiction, essays, picture books. Why do you think that poetry is so central to your thinking? How do you come back to poetry again and again?
It's funny, but I think that the earliest literature I was exposed to was an oral literature. And it was those stories, those folkloric stories that are told, and they're told so much over the centuries that they're polished and they're full of metaphor, because they've had all these editors, they've had centuries of editors coming at them, refining the story. So the stories I grew up with, the bedtime stories that I grew up with, whether they were La Llorona or La Muchacha que bailó con el diablo, or any of the poems that we were taught to declamar, they were very poetic. And so I have always been influenced in my writing and in literature by the oral literature that I was exposed to. And some of it was based on written literature, like the poems that we would declaim, that we were taught as young children to declaim. But my grandmother had taught it to my elderly aunts, and then they taught it to me. And I don't know if my grandmother was taught it by another family member, but it turns out that the poet, the book, after many years, I think it was just a few years ago, one of my grad students said, "Oh, ma'am, I know that poem." And she showed the original to me, and she was very proud. She was from South America, and it was from her country, and the poet was from her country, and it was published in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. But it had been passed down. It had been memorized and passed down. So my natural tendency is to go towards poetry, because poetry has been compacted. It's been edited. It's been polished. It doesn't have the frills left on it. It's very direct, sometimes earthy language. And it's also oral. Poetry by necessity has got to sound right on the ear. It's got to be able to be, I think it was Montaigne that used to read poetry off his back patio, his back garden, off the garden wall, to see how it sounded when it bounced back off the wall. So I think my tendency is towards theatrical writing, mm-hmm. poetic writing, children's writing, all of which I feel are very polished and bubbled down. So I didn't intend to write a novel in verse. Mm-hmm. I didn't even intend to write a novel. I was working on something else, and it was during the pandemic. And I was sitting at my desk, and the voice came at me, and I started to write it down. And it was the character Tere, who I've performed many times on stage over the years. She was written for the stage, and she was the first grade version, but this was her 6 years later talking to me, and I was writing it down, so it was in her voice. And I just, every time I'd finish with a certain section, I'd go to the next page and write the next thing that she said. And it was coming out really fast. It really basically all came out, was written and polished and edited within a month before I sent it off to anybody else. And when I sent it to my agent and then the editor that purchased, they loved it. And we polished it some more. But it's almost like I was 20 pages into writing the novel in verse before I realized, wait a minute, this is a novel in verse. I did not set out to do it, because my style as a writer is, if you're going to involve characters, you let those characters come to life and you give them power and you let them speak and do what they want to do. You may have to slap their hand at some point or say, behave like yourself. Yeah, who are you? You're not behaving like yourself. But still, you let it be their voice. And so I tend to follow the character and see where it goes. And that's what happened. I knew kind of where it was headed. But I had only known Tere as a 6-year-old. I had never known her at 12. And she surprised me that she reclaimed. She didn't just complain about it. You know, she said, I'm going to get it back. And how do I do it? And how do I change the world so this doesn't happen again?
There is so much that I appreciate and even love about the novel. And so when you asked me to translate it, and I read it several times before even beginning the translation, I was so moved by the way that you constructed this family. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about your process and also the reasons for creating a mixed status family. That fact that her dad doesn't have papers and he gets deported and she lives without him during the pandemic for so many months. And what brought you to make that decision to have a little Chicanita from San Antonio have a mixed status family?
Right. Because we as human beings are complicated. You know, I once taught a course at Trinity called the Mestizo in Everyone. And the students that signed up for it were really excited because they sense that you come from your father's side and your mother's side. Even if you come from the same ethnicity, it's different experiences, it's different values. Sometimes it's different regions or languages that they come from. So human beings aren't neat and clean and all fit in one box. We spill over several boxes usually. We don't fit inside just one of the boxes on the forms. And the same thing with undocumented families. Some of them have two parents that come from different countries. People fall in love. And a lot of young undocumented men that come to work in the US end up marrying somebody who's from here. And the reality that a lot of people don't understand about the undocumented, it's not just a matter of, oh, well, you should have come legally or you should become legal. You want to become legal. A young woman in the Valley told me, Señora, yo quisiera ser legal. I would love to be legal, but it's impossible. It costs too much. And that's what a lot of folks don't realize, that every step of this process, even when it's a naturalization process, there's a huge fee that goes with it. There's steps that need to be taken. So here's a young man who falls in love with a young Chicana from San Antonio, whose mother's family is actually from San Antonio since before it was San Antonio, recognizing the indigenous roots in this town, and that there were people here before the Europeans arrived, and those people didn't just disappear or go away. Sometimes they were colonized or killed, or other things happened to them, but you know, a lot of the people running around with, as the grandma says in the book, you know, we didn't disappear. We're still here. You know, we're named Sanchez or González or Fuentes or de la Rosa, but we're still here. And we might speak Spanish, we might speak English, but we have the same blood and we have the same values. And so that's the family he fell in love with. He fell in love with the woman he married, but he also fell in love with her mom. Enough so that he insists that their daughter be named after her mom. So this is a realistic story to me. It's real life, and real life is messy, and people come from all different origins, and they make friends of all different backgrounds. And this is what happens in the book. The young woman she falls in very quickly with these three friends who are all Mexican American, because she's on the west side of town and most people are Mexican American. But then she develops a friend that she has to struggle a little bit to work out their cultural differences, and that's Heather. And Grandma gives her some patience about that. She tells her, well, if she doesn't understand what Dia de los Muertos is, have you explained it to her? So
can you invite her over
human
so that
beings,
she can see it?
are mixed. And so the decision was very easy. I wanted real characters that had complicated lives, that things weren't just the same that they'd always been, or that it was very easy to fill out in a form that they would fit in this box or that box, or have a standard nuclear family, whatever. It came out very naturally to me that her mother would come from a long-term West Side San Antonio barrio family, and that her father and her grandparents on the father's side were Mexican nationals.
I wanted to ask you about Publishers Weekly gave your book a star review, and it classified it as the readership supposed to be for 10-year-olds, but we know that this is not a novel for only for 10-year-olds. Can you talk a little bit about your readership and who you intended the novel for, especially because we have such difficult subjects that are being treated in the novel. We have Black Lives Matters. We have, of course, already mentioned the undocumented mixed status. We have the pandemic. We have death in occurring. One of the teachers that how do we put all of that for a 10-year-old? What were you thinking in terms of the readership when you were
when I wrote? I wasn't thinking, oh, this is for 10 to 14-year-olds. I was writing the voice of a 12-year-old, and I was trying to put myself in her skin and speak in her voice. And 12-year-olds are very interesting because they still carry a lot of the innocence of childhood, and a lot of the idealism, a lot of the honesty that comes with childhood, but their minds have already moved over into adult thinking in many ways. And so they're asking questions. They don't always have the same answers to them that an adult would have, but they're asking questions about heavy things. So I was thinking about honoring Selena Teresa. That's who the book was focused on. And then as I moved along, I said, yeah, this is for kids. It's probably for middle grade. I realized that, but I didn't let that become more important than the voice of this child who did exist. And there are children who exist who ask questions about adult things when they're 12 or even younger. So I was surprised. Well, I wasn't. I knew that adults liked it because I had shared it with a few friends while we were in the process of waiting for the final book to come out. And these were adult women and adult men who said, I love this character. I loved this book so much. And I thought, are they just lying to me to be, they're trying to be nice or something? But no, they come back and said, can I order it now? Because I want a copy for my sister, because she went through this too. And I went through this. And I realized that it was a story that a lot of adults have had, of having a name changed, not having their history represented in the books, asking questions when their entire ethnic group was kind of lumped together, and stereotyped in negative ways, that there was something inside a lot of adults' lives that had not been fully solved. And sometimes when we read characters that are diverse empower us, even if we're not of the same diversity they empower us to accept our own differences from the norm. So I was getting a lot of responses from adults. But what surprised me was when Publishers Weekly classified it for ages, it said 10 and up. And I went to my editor, Penguin, and I said, when they say 10 and up, do they mean 10 through 18, or
100?
10 through adult, or what? She said up means no limits, that it would be of interest to an adult, it would be of interest to a 10-year-old. And I said, okay, I didn't ask her how non-standard that was, but I know that I have enjoyed a lot of writing that was intended for young adults. And I think you can write universal stories. Otherwise, there wouldn't be folklore that was enjoyed by adults telling the story to children who then carry it on. They're both getting something out of it. So they get it at different levels. They understand it at different levels. But I do feel very happy that not only Publishers Weekly, but I think it was School Library Journal also said 10 and up. So it opens it up to everything. And I've always had a problem staying within genres, within the borders, within the set rules. You know, I've always insisted that, you know, when you give kids those little tabs, the tab dividers, and they have 6 subjects and certain things are only within one subject. And if they're not within the subject of math or the subject of social studies or the subject of English, we don't deal with them. And I thought, why not? These 6 subjects do not represent everything that there is to learn in the world. We go beyond the borders, and maybe it's just my own growing up in 2 languages and 2 cultures and visiting 2 nations and having relatives in 2 nations. Maybe it's that did it to me, or maybe it's just the realization that we as human beings are not so narrowly defined. And so I think that goes to the readership too. Some things are relevant to 10 to 14-year-olds and 15 to 18-year-olds and adults as well. So
I'm going to ask you one last question, and then we're going to open it for the audience to ask you questions directly. But my last question is around the translation. You are a translator yourself. You have done some translations. And I was wondering if you could explain to our audience the process that you went through with, I believe when you contacted me, you said that you had someone that had attempted to translate some poems, and then you said, can you tell us about that process?
Yes.
And
oh yes, thank you. I've done translations before, and I don't know if it's only me, but translations go slow because you're not only wanting to do justice to the original, but you want it to sound authentic in the language that it's coming out in. And then if that's complicated by a regional or cultural difference, that's not a standard. And certainly Selena Teresa Guerrera Maya was not a standard character who spoke only English. She spoke Texas English, and she spoke Texas Spanish, and she knew the translanguaging down. She knew how to do it so comfortably where it wasn't patchy and it wasn't artificial. I wanted to know that the translator could do that. And so when I told the publisher, yeah, I would love to have a translator do it, because you know, I think they do it faster than I would do it. I'd probably start rewriting the book if I did.
It's tempting to rewrite when you're translating yourself.
Yes, and I said, I want somebody who is competent in Texas English without being stereotypic, who is competent in Texas Spanish, because this child was not raised in Mexico City. She speaks a good Spanish, but it's not a Mexico City Spanish or a Spain Spanish or an Argentine Spanish, and there are big differences. It's so much of it is told not in a third person narrative, but in the first person. It's got to sound like a kid from the west side of San Antonio. And they said, sure, we have somebody wonderful who can handle that. But when it came back, my first impression of the first poem that I saw translated was, wow, this is just so beautiful and poetic. It sounds like Pablo Neruda or Gabriela Mistral, but it doesn't sound like a 12-year-old kid. You know? So first of all, she didn't get the kid right. And then second of all, I began to suspect that the person spoke better Spanish than they did English. And so they were missing the boat on some really critical things that were said. And it's hard to get all of those translated across. So I really wanted somebody who would know how to do it right. And my agent said to me, they probably don't know anybody who speaks, and trans languages can go back and forth. Like there's a poem about Mr. Vega, who's named after Mr. Vega in San Antonio. All of the teachers in here are named after real teachers in San Antonio.
I love that part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's a jokester, just like all of us know the teacher and poet Eddie Vega is a jokester who's the taco poet. So the character in the book says, let's talk about it. Then, your taco on enzymes is due tomorrow. And the kids are rolling in the aisle. Well, it's going to take somebody who's comfortable with translanguaging to be able to do that. And I was up against a wall and we brainstormed, and then I looked over. She said, why don't you look at the Spanish language books that you have that are translated? And I picked up, and there was Where Wonder Grows. Yes.
There we are. Here's one of them.
Spanish. And I looked at who the translator was. And I said, oh my God, it's Rita. I know Rita. She's wonderful. Why didn't I think of her? And so I called, and then I called them back and I said, take a look at this poet. She's amazing. And they loved your work.
Thank you.
And they loved the translation, and I did too. And just so people don't think that we fall asleep at the wheel, writers, when we have somebody else translate, a lot of bilingual writers, when something is translated for them, actually go through the whole thing again,
line by line.
They find, did this say exactly what I wanted to say, what I meant for this character to say in English? Is that character saying that in Spanish? So we had a few conversations there. What do you think? Do you think this would be better? Do you think they'd understand this? Does this sound something that would be universally understood? As you can speak Spanish anywhere in the world and read it,
right? But
you understand that the speaker is not from anywhere in the world; they're from here. So that's what I was looking for it to sound authentic. And
I will be forever grateful that you invited me to do this work with you. And I can't wait to have the Spanish version in my hands. I have the English version, but yet to have the Spanish version. And so thank you so much, Carmen. We're gonna go ahead and open it up for our audience participants. If you have questions for Carmen, please, let me ask the organizers, are we putting them in the chat, or are they allowed to open their mic and ask it?
They can put it in the chat. We do have one question already in the chat. If you want to read that, Rita.
Let me see. I'm not sure if I'll be able to find it. If it's the very last thing that was there, Elba Villalpandos?
Yes.
Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
I've been very intrigued with you have to be brave, and wonder whether there was that one teacher who encouraged you to be brave with your writing.
Actually, no, I never did have any creative writing encouragement that I can think of in school. We were in West Side schools. We were the non-preferred school districts at that time, and very few Mexican American teachers, very few teachers that I would even be able to admit this to, because at the time I went to school, anything in Spanish was against the rules, against state law. So no, I didn't get the encouragement from teachers. I actually got the encouragement from my mother, who had a 7th grade education, had always wanted to be a teacher. And turns out I didn't really realize it till I was an adult, but then I found a few papers here and there that I really didn't think about at the time, where she'd write this nice rhymey poem to me, congratulating me on being such a nice daughter to her when I was like 17 or something. I didn't realize that my mother also loved poetry. So it was my mom, it was the tias and the grandmas who said, escríbalo, 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 tú mijita, escriba la historia nuestra. They were the ones who encouraged me. But as an adult, and as getting into college and grad school, and then later on as a professional, I ran into so many teachers that would knowing that I was a writer, would then come to me and say, look what my student wrote, and then introduce me to the student. and parents who would bring their
Mhm.
child and say, my child has written this, would you read it? Do you like it? You know, so that's where these teachers were definitely the 2019 to 2020 school year. They were in the middle of the pandemic,
Mhm.
and they are based on real teachers in San Antonio. Most of them are great, and then there's one in there that's, as you heard, not so
Not so great.
encouraging, not so great. But so many of the teachers in there respect her, listen to her, answer her questions,
Mhm.
and that's amazing. I just feel the world is filled with amazing teachers, and that I've been lucky enough to see a lot of these young teachers who are also writers, who just lay it all out there to encourage these kids to bloom into the expression that they have from inside them.
Carmen, Angel Ramos, or I'm sorry if it's Angel Ramos, did you participate in bilingual education? What academic support helped you as a student?
Okay. Angel, you don't realize how old I am. The year I graduated from high school was the year that they changed the law that forbade the speaking of foreign languages on school grounds. So, so I got bilingual education, but I got it after I was in a doctoral program. I chose a doctoral program in bilingual education. And my generation were largely the people who kind of invented bilingual education. If you, I mean, not worldwide, but in this area, who actually wrote the programs, and my husband was involved in building a bilingual teacher preparation program at UTSA. And so that's why I didn't get that. I wished I had. And I remember reading bilingual textbooks that my elder aunts that were teachers were beginning to use right before they retired, and after I was already a grad student. So the academic support I got was from teachers, the few teachers there that said, you can do it. If you decide you want to travel to Timbuktu, you can do it. They would say that to all the kids in the classroom. And we were kids who were so poor. Some of the kids, neither parent had gone past third grade or fourth grade. And those were the teachers that empowered us. So that was the support that I got. I got a lot of support at home, where my dad, you know, and the church we went to, we read all of our biblical verses were read in Spanish. And so that's what my dad said, that, you know, God wrote the Bible in Spanish, and you've got to learn Spanish. And so that's where I got my exposure to Spanish, was from the family and from the church. So I learned to read in school in English. Then I sat through these long Bible study classes for church, and they're telling you what verse, what chapter to go to. You're watching it and you're hearing it read. So that's where I learned to read Spanish. And it was right after learning to read English. It was, you know, because of the church, and because of family members insisting that I must know how to speak Spanish. It was next to, instead of cleanliness is next to godliness, it was bilingualism is next to godliness. You must speak Spanish. So
I love
that's
that.
where I got my support from.
I love that. Mary Sue Galindo says, you are an amazing teacher, mujer, exclamation mark. And Allison asks, what inspired you to become a teacher? Was that the path you always saw for yourself?
Not always. I originally wanted to be Roy Rogers. I wanted to be a girl cowboy. And they said, you want to be a cowgirl? And I said, no, I don't want to be a cowgirl. I want to be a girl cowboy. The cowgirl was Dale Evans, and she always said things like, hi, y'all, bye, y'all, chow time. I wanted to get on the horse and run off and have the adventures like Roy Rogers did. So I kept saying girl cowboy, and they didn't get it. And so I gave up on that. And then I said, okay, I want to be Tarzan. And that was exciting to me, swinging through the trees. That's what I thought. I wanted adventure and I wanted travel, and that didn't work well. And then I decided I wanted to be an artist, and that really, my father blew up at that, because he told me that I would starve to death, but that wasn't the fear, because he knew that my aunts, who were teachers, two of my aunts were teachers, and they made less than the janitor at the school at that time. So it wasn't about money. I think he was scared that artists would hang around backstage with actors and evil people, immoral people, and all kinds of improper, indecent things would happen. And when I finally said, I want to be a teacher like Aunt Annie, they all flipped. They all said, yes, hija va a ser maestra. So that's how I was about 6 or 7 when I came up with the teacher thing. And I do like teaching. And I think that even as a writer, I'm always conscious of what are people going to learn from this? What's the message? I think writers are teachers, but they're also revolutionaries, as Gabriel Garcia Marquez said, because they want the reader to see something that the reader's not seeing. I always say the artist is the prophet of society, but prophet in the Old Testament sense of the word, not somebody who sees the future, somebody who can interpret the present, who can say, look what's happening right here. You need to understand this. You need to see this. And that's why writers write. And so I was some cross between a teacher and a writer, but I always knew I wanted to be a writer. And I became a teacher, so I knew I could support my writing habit.
But you're also an amazing traveler through your stories as well, right? Like you have so many stories from so many different places. We have a room for one more question, and this one is coming from Cela's iPhone. And it says, do you have a favorite image or scene in your book that you can tell us about?
My favorite image is of Selena Teresa when she decides to go do something desperate. Through most of this, she's logical and she's taking advice from grandma and she's talking to the teachers and she's talking things out with her friends. But when the pandemic hits and they're at home and mama is working double shifts because dad's not there to pay, the bills, mama's doing a double load. She doesn't have that support, so she does something very impulsive and very loca, very crazy, very risky and very dangerous. And she's out in the darkness. I don't want to tell too much, but she's decided she's going to go get her dad, and she's going to take a bus to McAllen to, get her father and bring him back. And she's out there on her bike. I don't know if she's going to ditch the bike when she gets to the bus stop or stick it in the, I don't know what she's going to do, but at any rate, she's running away she has mom's at work, grandma's in bed asleep, and she figures she has to go take care of this now. And when she's there, and she's just told the story of La Llorona to her little cousin. So she's already kind of scared, and a hand grabs her on her shoulder and says, where are you going? And that's my favorite scene, because it turns out to be one of her friends who's also out at night for financial necessity of helping his family get enough money to eat. So that's my favorite moment in the book, is because it's why, and I think it's like real life. If literature doesn't have something real in it, and I had a friend who was an expert in American autobiography. He said the most fictional word in the English language is I, and the most factual stories are told in fiction. Things have to reflect the human experience, and they have to be, I think they have to be realistic enough. Even fantasy and science fiction are realistic in their own way. So in this, it reflected something true and something deep. And so I feel that this is why we as writers try to get things on the paper that really capture reality. And the best of us, the most logical and most calm, will hit moments when we do something really impulsive and really crazy. We're pushed to extremities and we want to fix things.
Mhm.
And that's where she was at when this turning point happens in the book, right? When you're right on the brink, who is it that brings you back? It's a friend. It's
That's
a friend
right.
that puts the hand on and says, what do you think you're doing? You're not going to do this.
That's
So
right.
I like that. I like what it says about friendship. I like what it says about the depth of the friend that could see what she was suffering through. And so that's my favorite moment.
That's wonderful. And I've been told that we can go over to 8:05. So is there something that you would like to leave us with? Is there something that maybe we didn't ask you that you would like to tell our audience?
I know that a lot of the audience members either write or love the thought of writing or know somebody who writes or wonder about can they write their own story. I see some of the faces out there are people that I know have powerful stories inside them that either life or circumstance has kept them from being able to do because they were busy taking care of the rest of the world, and I wanted to just say, for those of you who haven't had a chance to put your story down, to write the things you want to write, listen to the magic in the words around you. Listen to the things that happen in everyday life, the power in the phrases and the depth in them, and just write it without being critical of yourself. Write it without saying, I'll never have the time to finish this. Just write, catch whatever spare moment you can and write it down, and write and write and write. And like every other muscle in the body, the more you use it, the stronger it gets. So I guess that's my message. Let the words reach out to you, be open to them coming to you, and you reach out and search and grab whatever it takes. Don't be negative on yourself. If you look at a draft and you say, this is terrible, and do not tear it up and throw it in the trash can. Scratch out one word or two or one sentence or two that are terrible and keep going. Because eventually it's going to be polished. There's something underneath there that you want to say. And if the terrible sentences are on the top, that's okay. Just keep going. You can take off your creative hat later and put on your critical hat and go through and change it and improve it. Writing is worth it. It's satisfying to us, but also connects with others and things that I never thought other people would relate to. It's, they're not going to like this. Nobody's going to understand this. This is just my family. I'm the weirdo. Some other weirdo out there in the world will find that and they'll say, oh yes, I understand that. That is what I was going through. We're all weirdos. We're all different.
Yeah.
And when we write, we value ourselves, we value our experience, and we allow other people to see themselves reflected in these books and to value their own experiences as well.
That's wonderful final thoughts. I'm wondering, Florinda, if you wanted to close us up or
Yeah, well, thank you all so much. We will send, yes, absolutely. I see little emoji clapping going on. So absolutely awesome to hear you all, to hear you read, Carmen, and then to hear the conversation that you all had. So again, thank you so much for joining us for the Big Texas Author Talk. I did drop a link to the survey, so please let us know what you thought of this event, and we hope that you will join us for future ones. Thank you all so much and have a good night.
Gracias. Good night.
Good night.